sales and building products, and that's it. The more sales I do, the better I understand the product. The better I understand the product, the more sales I will close. If I outsource sales, then I don't understand the value, then I can assign the price. If price is zero, then the value is a little bit over this zero. Founders, by definition, are optimistic because if they were pessimistic, they wouldn't get into the startups. Today, I would like to share what I learned about founder-led sales, and basically a couple of things that I want to make sure that I address today. And if I forget, just let me know. The first thing is how actually to do founder-led sales and why. What's the purpose? And it's not only about saving on sales reps, right? It's about actually learning from the market. And I want to share how I did that and what I see like the best practices of others doing this. The second thing is at some point you have to scale your team and actually switch from founding sales to basically a team of sales reps. And the goal, the focus, the way you do that and the way you measure that changes significantly. And I think we need to know the indicators that we are ready to scale the sales, and then we need to understand how to monitor and control those. Because I just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with one of the CEO of one pretty fast-growing startup, and one of the things that he told me was like, the calendars of my sales reps are not busy. I don't see them making calls every day, 5 times a day. And I realized, after asking a couple of questions, I realized that he actually does not have the mental map how to control and manage the sales. And since I managed 10 plus sales teams, I understand, and since I made that transition from founder-led sales to actually having a team, I realized that this experience might be beneficial for you. Okay? And just a quick note about myself. Basically, we're building some sales tools to basically automate B2B sales. So most of the experience is coming from the B2B sales, but I think I'll share some of the things about B2C, at least for the stages where it makes sense. And onsa.ai is the company that I'm leading right now, and doing right now as we speak, I do about 2 to 3 founder sales every day. This experience is very, I'd say, is very beneficial, and having this conversation helps me to realize what needs to be done. What is the actual purpose of the early stage pre-product market fit site? I think it's just 2 things. It's just sales and building products, and that's it. YC says talk to your customers, build stuff, or things like that. I think that these 2 activities, sales and product development, they actually reinforce each other. I use sales to understand what needs to be built. I use that knowledge to build. I build to actually clarify if my hypothesis about the value was right or wrong. And the more sales I do, the better I understand the product. The better I understand the product, the more sales I will close. So this is a reinforcing feedback loop. And that's why I think many builders, many founders, they tend to focus on product because this is easy. First of all, typically building product does not depend on other people, and people are not predictable. They cannot be managed. They cannot be controlled the way you can control the code, for instance, or the product. That's why we tend to gravitate towards product building, but actually if we just build product, we're getting ourselves into a closed system, a system that does not learn from the market, and that has lower chances of getting to the state where product actually meets the market, which is the purpose of the pre-PMF activities. So that's why I'll focus on sales, because I'm sure you know how to build, and I'm sure you know how to sell, but I just want to share some of my experience. And as I mentioned, we'll start with foundations, because I noticed that most of the books about sales, especially founding sales, they jump right into it. And maybe that's a great opportunity and that's a great approach, but I prefer to start from foundations. the key variables, the key equations, if you want, and actually we'll have a couple of equations, the key elements of the system, and then when we have the foundation, we can build on that to understand why we need to do sales, founding sales, and how to do that. Okay, so I'll start with foundations, then that will naturally lead to why we need to do sales ourselves, then when actually to scale this. And when we scale, we need to consider and actually we need to approach the sales as a repeatable process. While on the founder-led sales, it's more of a, what's this, Paul Graham's famous quote, do things that don't scale, right? Most of the stuff that the nature of activities changes significantly on this transition. That's why I think we need to distinguish between those two. The foundations, it's actually pretty easy. What is the first term or what is the first word that comes into mind when we think about sales?
Sales pitch.
Okay, what else?
Can listen to people.
Okay, that's great. Anything else?
Calls.
Calls, okay. But let's say we want to buy something. What is the first thing that... Idea.
Quality.
Quality.
Advertising.
Okay.
Wow.
Money. Okay.
Price. Yeah.
Price. For me, it's price because price is like an anchor, how you think about sales. And most of us builders, we focus on price first because price, you know why price is so natural? Because we can control price, right? Because we can, we'll get to that. But the first thing is actually price because we can control the price. We can increase, decrease, we can talk about price. We think we talk about price when we talk to prospective customers. And actually, I am waiting for a question about price because this is a great indicator that the person actually needs that. But you're absolutely right that, we have some other aspect, and we'll get to that. The second thing that we think about when we do business is, for me, is cost. Because when I want to control the price, say when I want to lower the price, I think about the cost, because cost is the limiting factor for the price and for the amount that I can, basically, for the discount or things like that. And the cost is very important because, again, this feels something closer to us because cost is something that we have, that we can calculate. Some of the costs we can control, actually, and that's why the cost. But as Daniel said, actually, value is the third element. There are three elements that I think are foundational to the sales. And if there's one thing that I want you to internalize, that this is the basic equation, that all of the things that I will be talking about will be the consequences of this equation. You don't see equation yet, it's going to appear in a moment. What is the first rule for any business in terms of the relationships between these elements?
Price is higher than cost.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like number one thing. If price is higher than the cost, then we're profitable. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the cost dynamics and how that impacts the price. But basically, we need to make sure that price is higher than the cost. And again, in some cases, we're okay to make it lower than the cost if we can predict that the cost will go down. And we'll talk about, or we will have the power.
In free model, it's not necessary.
Not necessarily.
In free model, you can sell, you can give for free something, which has some cost.
Exactly, but does it really have cost? So digital products, I'd say their cost, most of the times, they're variable cost, and we'll talk about two types of costs. But most of the times for a digital product, the cost is zero, essentially. And that's why the freemium model was possible, because there was this great equation between the cost, the price of distribution of the digital product. But most of the times, cost, again, even if it's zero, zero will be the limiting factor, right? Okay, price, yes.
How do you say cost is zero? The cost can't be zero.
First of all, cost can be relatively zero or relatively small compared to something. But I agree that for most of the products, it's non-zero. but I can give out, the point that Cyril was making is that I can give out products free of charge, so lower than the cost. And my thesis, and I'll explain later, is that I will do that for a future gains in either the value or the cost.
So always have a bigger picture in
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
I agree, but cost
Yeah.
can't be zero as well.
Yeah, it's relatively
Yeah,
zero.
yeah.
Yes,
This is
absolutely.
borrow from your future.
Yeah, absolutely. But the second part of the equation is that the value should be higher than the price, because otherwise the sale shouldn't happen, right? Because someone I think said, either Adam Smith or someone, that the fact of sales or a sale is basically a mutually beneficial exchange of two things. Maybe money to product, money to money. And the key condition of that mutually beneficial exchange is that each side of the exchange thinks that they are in the advantage. So that's why the value should be higher than the price, because otherwise there's no reason to buy a product. And essentially, this equation drives all of the things that I will be talking about today. Okay? Yes. Let's just bear with me, we'll get to that, okay?
Okay.
Because, for instance, every book about money actually spends most of the book talking about value, and then money just pays it for it. But we'll get to the value and things like that.
Maybe it's quite subjective thing.
Absolutely. That will be my key point. That it's subjective, it's subject to a bunch of biases, and we can impact those biases or remove those biases for the benefit of sales. For instance, if a bias decreases the value lower than the price, then we need to impact that to basically make the sale happen. Okay? Then, if you think about this, then the higher price is over the cost, the higher is our desire to sell. The higher is a margin, the more we want to sell this. And basically, as a business, one of our goals is to decrease the cost, increase the price, right? As I think Mark Andreessen said, that the number one advice for every startup is to decrease the price. But I think it's just one part of the equation. Anyway, the first task is to, if we increase the difference between these two, then the higher the difference is, the higher is the desire to sell this product. But what about the other? If the difference between the value and the price is the highest, what is that? If it's desired difference between the value and the price, the higher the difference between the value and the price, the higher.
Overcoming the dollar market.
Okay, I'm trying to use the analogy as here. So the higher this difference is, the higher is our desire to sell.
Decided to hire the price.
Okay, that's great. But one more step. So the higher is the value, the difference between the value and the price, the higher is. Think about this. You get something for $1, but the value of it is $2. Yes, exactly. Essentially, when we try to increase this difference, we're trying to increase the desire to buy. When we're trying to increase this difference, we're trying to increase the desire to sell. So the billion-dollar question is, what is the focus of the founder? This or this?
The ideal is about first one.
Yeah, I'd say this is the first priority, right? Because first of all, I can control this. I'll probably have a bunch of effects, and we'll talk about them on this. But this is external to me, because value is how it's perceived by the customer. And
Without the enforcement feedback loop, you cannot basically understand what kind of value you give to people. You have only your own
absolutely, absolutely, and we'll talk. So you got the first consequences of this equation. So when I think about parameters or variables, I think about 3 circles. And the first circle is things that I can control. like I said, price I can fully control, right? I can change it whenever I want, actually. For some kind of distribution agreements, this is not the case, but overall, I control the price. Who knows what's the second circle?
Partially control is the cost, as you mentioned.
Yeah, the second is impact or partially control. Yes. So the point is that I probably can influence or impact that variable, but not 100%. So I can't control it. And obviously, for instance, value is there. But there's a third one, which is I just have to take into account. For instance, laws, right? Laws, we can't change. Most of us, we can't change laws. Most of us. We have to take into account. It's great to actually map those variables onto these three circles. As we said, we can control price, fully control price. If that's the case. Costs. Value, sorry. Value, partly we can influence by communication, by sales, and this is what we'll be talking about. But partly we just have to take into account, and that's what some people, I think, sometimes forget. For instance, trying to sell some kind of product to a company that does not need that product. There's no value for them because they're in a specific industry or in a specific country where, say, your product helps me to be compliant, as a company, to be compliant with some kind of law. If I'm trying to sell this to a company from another country, that law does not apply, so they have no value. So it seems like when we're talking about the second variable, it's on the, like, somewhere in between we have to take into account because that's going to be a external force. And second, we can somehow influence. And our goal is to, in communication and sales, is to actually influence that. Or the second goal is to find those companies, people, for whom the value is relevant, the highest for us. And we'll talk about it. But what about the costs? For costs, I think most of the times it's somewhere in between impacting and taking into account. Let me try to drill down to this. I impact the costs if, for instance, that's a cost on employees, right? I can hire, I can fire. But if it's supply materials for my, say, let's say I'm using OpenAI's API, right? I'll probably can't influence those. I'll have to take into account. Seems like cost is somewhere here. And then the consequence of this thing is, I think that drives our tools or our levers that we have. We need to have levers to increase value. We need to have levers to impact cost. That is directly related to the equation that we have. And for the price, we can control it, we can change it. There is no, I think, there is no grand theory or foundational laws behind the price because we can control that. There are no best practices, but there should be best practices how to influence the value or to find people or companies who have that value highest, or how to impact the cost. Okay? So let's drill down to the cost. When we sell something, our price is their cost, right? So again, the same equation, but we're just mirroring it. But that's not the only cost, right? What else? Say I want to sell an ERP or a CRM for
Some integration problems.
Implementation
cost. Yeah,
Education, procurement,
exactly.
compliance, lots
So-
of stuff.
Exactly. So it seems like when we think about price, we think about what the part of it that we control, but from the perspective of the customer, it's not the only element. Actually, it's at least these. It's a switching cost. I need to switch between something onto your product. There's behavior change costs. I think they are massive for, especially for companies. The more people are involved in using a product, the higher are the behavior change costs. By behavior, the habits that people have or companies have or processes that they have. And third, I think it's learning costs. So It seems if we want to control those or influence those parameters, we should take care about these things. So basically, when I'm offering a POC, a proof of concept, or a pilot project, or a trial, I need to basically reduce these costs, and that will make the difference between the price and the value high. So that's basically what my purpose is here.
Now, workplace things of those associated costs.
What's that?
The things associated
Yes.
costs.
Yes.
Of course, we want to minimize them because then it would make adoption very easy.
Yeah. It's just that my point is that most of the times we forget about these.
I would also put bullet number 4, minimizing risk,
Yeah.
from different perspectives.
That's good.
From enterprise employee who's making decision.
Yes.
Those 3 are important, but minimizing his or her personal risk is super important.
Do you think it's a cost or the risk impacts the value?
It's a good question. Risk.
But it looks more like a risk here. Because risk, it's also switching cost here, because risk to change a solution or something another, especially start complicated, it's a really huge risk, especially
Yeah.
for enterprises,
But
for
what-
managers in
Yeah.
enterprises.
What's the consequence? The risk is some event, some probable event in future. But what's the consequence of a risk?
I will look into it from different perspectives. I will look into it from perspective what strategies your counterpart is using when he or she making decision. And from a risk minimizing perspective, it's clearly like minimax. So they're not like maxing out value.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes frequently they're
Okay.
like minimizing risk if something will go wrong.
Yeah, but again, in the P&L, in the profits and losses, there is no concept of risk. There's no concept of risk. There are concept of costs or expenses, and there are concept of revenues or profits. So is it the concept of risk, does it impact the cost or some other aspect of the P&L? That's the question. So I think sometimes it impacts the costs, sometimes it impacts the revenues or the value, and we'll get to that. Actually, I have something on that. But my point here is pretty simple. We forget about these, and that's why we tend to think about our price as just their cost. But in reality, the communication that we're having, which is the sales meeting, for instance, one of the purposes of the communication is actually to measure these costs, right? Because if we can't measure these costs, then we can't measure the equation of value versus price, because for them, price is not only our price, it's price plus these costs, okay? There's the second thing, the value, and it's even more important. I think that there are a finite number of types of product versus value. Every product delivers one of 3 values. It's my assumption. The first value, and I think these are the best products, when it delivers the incremental revenue, right? If I can link how my product drives the revenues of my customer, then it's fairly easy to basically share part of my revenue with the partner. So for instance, when we did a product that helped airlines drive in-flight revenue, my arrangement was revenue share. And revenue share was basically that 50% of all the incremental revenue that we deliver to the airline, we're getting that. And I think that psychologically, companies are it's fairly easy for them to justify, and for people, I think, when they act as professionals, as employees, or as entrepreneurs, it's fairly easy for them to justify spending part of the revenue that you help them drive on that product, right? What's the second type of product, by analogy? Yeah.
I would not spend money, so.
Yeah, basically it helps them to save on costs. And overall, I think it's a very good exercise for any B2B company to try to map. You take the P&L of your prospective customer and just try to map your product to elements of the P&L. But obviously, if product saves me money, then again, it's fairly easy to justify paying the price. What's the third type of
I
product?
have a phrase, it's not about it, so
Yeah.
it might not work,
Huh?
but it's about the values that the company actually wants to do. Hear me out, work with me.
Okay.
Look at the organization as a lever for the founder to fulfill some idea,
Yeah.
vision.
Yeah.
Say SpaceX creating the technology to make humans multiply into
Yep.
species.
Yep.
So that might not go into revenue and cost, but you can say that if you help founders to build what they want to build, in other words, you can bring value to what they do.
Yeah.
Help them to fulfill the vision.
Yep.
And that's where you bring value. Obviously, that can go back to revenue and cost, but somehow I think that when you remove value of vision or what kind of founders want to create, you look at the company very generic way, like it's only a machine to build money. It's actually a lever to build more.
I agree. So that's why I have the third type. But it's in a way similar to what you think, but maybe I picked the wrong term. Any ideas what's in the bottom of the pyramid?
Price.
What?
Price proposition.
Yeah, but basically revenue and costs are, the balance of revenue and costs is,
Break point.
let's say I'm offering you a getaway to your company, a getaway to say Napa Valley, a trip. So my services is the offering of a getaway to Napa Valley. Is that revenue? Is that
You mean something like a customer satisfaction score?
Emotions.
emotions? Yeah. So I think again, it's maybe the term I use, but I use the term entertainment. And
It's actually cost, yeah. If you
that's right. Actually, maybe what happens in the bottom, the things that you said, probably impact either the cost or revenue. We can say something like this. If we have that getaway to Napa Valley, then the productivity or motivation of our employees will be higher. That's why this will translate into revenue. Maybe. But I don't like using the 2 or 3 conversion processes to get to the eventual result. Like, for instance, let me rephrase. My key point here is that some products are easier to sell than others. And I think that the higher the product is in this pyramid, the easier it is to sell it. So basically, if I help to drive revenue, that's the easiest. If I help to save the costs, that's a little bit harder, but still easy. And it's very hard to sell entertainment.
like vitamins, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, like vitamin. Because at the end of the day, if it's a business, they think in terms of P&L. They think in terms of sometimes balance sheets, but most of the times in terms of the P&L. Yes, some people in the organization may think about, instead, say, HR, right, or some other. But most of it comes down to if you pay attention to the costs or to the aspects that were removed during the crisis, you will notice that these products are removed for the highest priority.
So your point, if it's directly attributed, so to some P&L lines,
Yes,
it's easier
it's
to
easier
sell.
to sell.
If it's like indirectly attributed or
Exactly.
not attributed.
Must have and good to have.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Again, getting back to the equation. So if our product is, if we can communicate, and if it's the case actually, and if we can communicate, if we can link how our product actually links to their revenue or their costs, we'll have easier sell. That's my key point here. Okay? And it makes, I think, perfect sense. Okay, but here's the problem. That I think value does not equate to perceived value. For instance, value of ice or value of water. So value is intrinsically linked to the perception, to the context, and what drives the perception is the context. my experience and things like that. So if I'm in some kind of desert, then of course water might be at some point has the highest perceived value, but the moment I take it, a liter of it or two, the value will decrease. Like I think Silva said that the value is subjective, and that's my point here, that the value is not equal to perceived value. And what happens in the founder sales is that how founder values the product is way different from how customer perceives it. Because for founder, for instance, the value of their product could be all those sleepless nights, right? Or things like that. And it could be opposite as well. At some point, I've noticed that builders, they tend to discount the value of their product because they have already built it. It's already there. And I think that's one of the reasons why people sometimes delay the release of their product, of the first version of their product, because they think that the value is not enough because they have already built, but there's still things to be done, and they're pushing the deadline, the release date, and things like that. But overall, my key point here is that, well, in that equation, we're not quite right, because the value, we need to talk about the perceived value. And what I think is important with that perceived value is that we take into account the biases that impact the perception. And there are a bunch of biases that I will talk about. So why value is lower, it's not equal, it's not lower, it's not, yes?
Because for classic formula equation, it's cost divided by perceived benefits.
Yes, yeah, and we'll get to that. But so why say I'm telling you that you will say I have a product that lets you earn $10 million a year. Why would you oppose to that $10 million number? Why? What could be the reasons?
The price for getting 10 million and 15 million a year.
No, we're not even talking about the price now. I'm making a statement that your company with my product will make an incremental...
Laws, ethical regulations, guidelines, anything that can prohibit you from...
So what is that, all of it?
This guy goes at risks.
Yes, in part, it's a risk, exactly. Different types of risks, right? For instance, there could be an implementation risk. It actually delivers the value of $10 million. But when we try to make our employees use the system, no one actually wanted to use it. So it's an implementation risk. Then there could be another risk that by the time we have this product, the opportunity is no longer there, right? Because those in the crypto space know what it means, the right time for the opportunity, right? There is an uncertainty of result over time. So, for instance, before I talk more about this, but let's just give one advice for a person. Let's say we're trying to sell something, and the key objection is that in 12 months, probably there won't be such opportunity anymore, so I won't make it. So what's the key goal? What's the key way to hack this?
Deliver value at the same time.
Yes, so reduce the time between the closing the deal and delivering the value, right? And then basically that would help us sell. When company realizes that the added costs of implementing that system are low, it's an easier decision for them to purchase the product. And I think there are a bunch of a stack of these biases that impact the inequality of value and perceived value. So what are those? First of all, it's a bounded rationality. The person I'm talking to may not, for instance, let's say I say something like, here's a new HR management system, and it will reduce the costs of hiring a new person from $2 to $1. Let's say 50% cost reduction. If I am not the right guy I may not even know what is the current level of costs. So it seems like if I'm targeting the wrong person, they may not actually know the value and they can't even perceive it because they have no experience. Because the concept of bounded rationality is that I use limited information to make decisions. The key, I forgot his name at the moment, but the key thing that person did to economics, he basically proved that people are not rational actors who have perfect access to information. Here's the thing, if I don't know what I don't know, your arguments about the value may not make sense. That's why the value will be different. The other is that I forgot what I knew, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's not always about like irrational behaviors.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like super clear rational,
Okay.
especially when you're talking about like B2B stuff.
Yep.
As for example, you're selling this HR system.
Yep.
Yes? And HRs are not the people who are managing. IT will manage it.
Yes.
And IT clearly see like negative radiology across the system is not very polished.
Yep.
And they need to support like main product
That's
rather
right.
than supporting like HR related stuff.
That's right.
So they don't give a shit about it.
Exactly. So my point here is that if it's not the right person, then they may not even know what's the value. They can't even perceive the value. So you have to switch the person. That's what ICP is, right? The ideal customer profile. You're trying to find the right person that can perceive the value and make it as close to actual value as possible, and even higher than that, if we can do that. But there are a bunch of...
Right person, the right multiple persons.
Exactly.
Or like stakeholders in this decision.
Yes. If we have enough different opinions that can impact the decision maker, then yes. That's why in B2B sales, you typically distinguish between the person that makes the decision and the influencers of that decision. And sometimes it's subordinates, right? Sometimes subordinates impact the decision. But there's some other perception biases, like for instance, let's say an earthquake happened. What is the most top of the mind thing for every company that has a potential impact by an earthquake, right? In some moments in time, people are more perceivable to the value of your product. That's my point. And we need the communication that we're doing, the research that we're doing when we prepare for the sales. The goal of it is to basically either find the people that perceive the value as the value is, or via communication, basically make them equal. And that's the purpose of sales for me. But the second thing is the uncertainty, the risk. And because perceived value does not equal delivered value. For instance, and that's why there are a bunch of things that we came up with. The money guarantees, the proof of concept, the risk tolerance, right? We can pick the companies that are more risk tolerant, not less. The whole concept of the early majority, the early adopters, and this thing basically stands on the idea of a varying risk tolerance. Say a startup in Silicon Valley is not equal to a government agency in Middle East, right? In terms of the risk tolerance, although that may vary. And of course, we're looking for some evidences, word of mouth, the testimonials. So it seems like when we try to influence the perceived value, first of all, via communication, we have to deal with the bounded rationality. And again, it's bounded rationality. It's not irrationality. It's bounded. It's just limited to information that's available. And the second thing is to basically reduce the uncertainty. That's important. Did you notice for 40 minutes or so I'm still talking about this equation? It's integral to the whole thing. Just all of this is consequences. Okay, so then the question is, how high should be the price versus the value, or the perceived value? the rule of thumb in the startup space is it should be 30 to 50% of the delivered value. So if I'm saving $1 million a year, then 300K should be the price you pay for my product. But I actually started thinking, why 30, 50? Why not 70, 99? It's perfectly irrational to charge 99% of the value as a price, right?
Reminds me of the old rhythm game.
It's called alternative game. That's right. There's this, in game theory and psychological studies, there's this game where you have to, basically you get $100 or 100 euro, I think it's euro here, yes, and you have to make an offer to another person, and if that person accepts, how to split that 100 euro. And if that person accepts, you get the money. But if that person rejects your offer of splitting, then no one gets anything. A bunch of experiments for advanced cultures and growing economies for advanced from the culture perspective. So all of the world was tested on this game, and it turns out that on average 30 to 50% is the offer that is accepted. So if I have $100 and I say to Daniel, I'll give you 30, I'll take 70. Most of the times, people, Daniels all over the world will accept this offer, 30 to 50. But if I say 10 and I get 90, he rejects and we get nothing. So I think that this impacts, this is the, at least some kind of explanation for this rule of thumb that 30 to 50% of the value should be the price that you charge for the value. And basically then our communication is to make sure that we measure the value, that we make the value as close to the perceived value as close to the actual value as possible, and then our price takes to 50%. Every airline that I sold our Life in the Air product asked me, so I was charging 50, and every person asked me about lower, and almost every one of them, when I said, okay, what percent? And they were saying something around 30%. So it seems like on some psychological level, this is what we think is a fair split. Okay? Yeah, okay. So again, price, value, 30 to 50%. Yes?
Don't you think it's markets drive a lot of things?
Absolutely.
Competition.
Absolutely.
There is a, if you underplay, there's always a doubt in.
Yeah.
So why are you sitting there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is a great question. Let's get to that a little bit later. I think that the market situation actually impacts the price that you can charge. Absolutely. And then we just get into another space. It's a space of how we should design our strategy to minimize the impact of competition. For instance, we could focus on, say, industries where the entry barriers are so high, for instance, airline industry. If you're not found in an airline, you can't do that. It's really complicated. But that's why you can, for instance, work on increasing the barriers to it, and thus save yourself from the competitive pressure on price. But this is like a starting point, and what you're talking is absolutely right. It's just that it's another part of the discussion, okay? But we can talk after this. So let's now talk about price and value. Now let's talk about value and cost. I think what's important to realize is that value and cost have their own dynamics, and these dynamics actually explain some of the strategies that startups have. Let's say number one. What is essentially a network effect? It's the more users we have, the higher is the perceived value. That's it. That's it. And if, for instance, we realize that our kind of product actually is susceptible, or our market is susceptible to network effects, then it makes perfect sense to, say, give out the app for free to increase the perceived value and then charge the price, right? It makes absolute sense. And that was the strategy, for instance, of Uber and other ride-sharing companies around the world. Then there's the second effect, which all of us know, it's a scale effect. Scale effect is absolutely, if this one, with the rise of users or customers, the values increase, this one influences the other side of the equation. The more users we have, the less cost. I think everyone knows if we have fixed costs, the more users, the less is the fraction of costs on a given product. And very important focus of any founder, I think, is to identify the costs, the variable costs that could become the fixed costs. Think about this again. This is very important. Let's say I have an API provider. Let's call that OpenAI. And they charge me per tokens. That's definitely a variable cost, right? The more tokens, the more money, the higher cost. Can I convert those costs, the costs on API intelligence, let's call it, from variable to fixed costs?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
That change to our.
Yes, absolutely. We can go open source. We can buy our GPUs and we can run this on our service, just paying maybe for electricity. So electricity probably will be the only variable cost there, but other costs will be fixed. Or what is caching? Prompt caching. I think prompt caching is actually a way to make the variable cost fixed costs. Because essentially you're putting the responses of your API into local storage. And exactly, I think, again, that equation, and I'm talking about the levers that we have to impact value or cost over time. And for instance, the LLM costs right now, the average drop in the cost is about 4 times every year, I think. So I can actually take that into account. And I'm sure this is how OpenAI fixes this, right? They're just switching from variable to fixed costs.
It's not always the case. Sometimes you can be in the market where with this token stuff.
Yes.
It's companies who are selling tokens to so many right now with zero differentiation in there.
Yep.
So it's a run to the bottom game.
Yep.
And then out there like selling the low costs.
Yes.
So you're better off to buy tokens from them rather than to buy the main stuff.
Makes sense. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. In some cases, you can reduce the variable costs. In some cases, you can make the variable cost fixed cost and thereby amplify the scale effect. That's my point. Okay? Just pay attention that we never talked about how to sell it yet. Although I think these foundations are important to understand why we need to communicate, why we need to make a research or something. Okay, so now let's talk about that, about founding sales and why.
Oh my God, I'm sorry, but
Yes.
this is a beautiful moment of the job. And now that everybody learned the foundations, come to my second seminar.
Yeah, that's right. I'll note that for my further. So, yeah, coming back to the key.
99.
It's like there was this joke that the first issue of a magazine is how to get into the death cycle on your airplane and read how to get out of it in the next issue of a magazine. That's the kind of joke. Yes. Let's get back to this fundamental equation, and like we discussed, the purpose or the focus on all of the founder-led sales is to basically is the value. And I think 2 aspects of it. First of all, understand what is the actual value for my customers, right? Because sometimes we have bad intuition about what our product actually, what kind of value it delivers. But the second thing is to communicate the value. So 2 aspects, learn the value and communicate. For instance, sometimes when we make sales, we can learn that the actual value, say, is not reducing the cost, but actually increasing the revenue. For instance, if we fix the problem with the lost orders lost to unavailability or constraints that this company has. So the founder-led sales, the focus is understand the value for themselves and communicate to the customers. And the second priority, I think, is the price, to understand the right price. And again, 30% rule is great, but actually, I think the price is much broader concept than just a number. It could be a business model. Is it the subscription? Is it the one-time fee? Is it the maintenance cost? and things like that. That's why price is a broader concept, but overall, we need to understand the value both for us and for the customer, and communicate to the customer, and then we need to find the right price. Again, yes, so searching for value. How do we search for value? First of all, we need to understand that every communication we have is a chance to learn. It's a chance to learn what is the value. And that's why the questions that we have in the sales we're just trying as the founders to understand or to search to find the right value. And for instance, like I had a sales call last week, and one of the first questions, and we'll talk about that, is that you ask some like general questions, things like, tell me how sales process works in your company. And the very first thing that the founder and CEO of that company started with, he said, this is the third CRM that we're testing. His top of the mind problem is the CRM, not the things. And I could not learn that if I didn't ask that question, right? That's why we'll talk about the questions, but the idea is that we're learning. And that's why the initial questions are very open. Let me start with do not, because did you notice that almost every religion is not prescribing how you should behave, it's prescribing how you should not. Because it's much easier, right? It's much easier to say what you should not do than what you should do. That's why I'll start with the nots, but then we'll talk about this. The not, number one, it's a consequence of that question again. I can't outsource sales as a founder, because if I outsource sales, then I don't understand the value, then I can assign the price, right? It makes perfect sense. And so I can't outsource sales. Although this is the first intuition, the first thing that comes to mind when builders think about. And believe me, my first year when I started in Moscow, so I moved from a smaller country to Russia to study there. The very first thing that I had is that I was very shy. So I couldn't, at that time in Moscow, there were not the supermarkets where you can grab the things you want and just put it in your basket and check out. You had to ask a person to do that for you, and they would give you some kind of paper, and then you go to the cashier, you give the paper, you give the money, and then they stamp it, and then you get it back and you get the product. So I was very shy. That's why when I realized there are supermarkets where I don't have to deal with those things, I just loved them. Now imagine all of my groceries are delivered by Amazon Prime still, although I can sell now, so I can communicate. I'm happy to communicate. But the point is that builders, I think, most of the times are people who are shy, and that's why we want to outsource sales. Makes perfect sense. But from the equation perspective, it's bad. The second thing, and I was still doing this as on my previous ventures, you hide behind the product demo decks. Basically, a call happens something like this. Small chat about weather or something. And then you say something like, okay, I have a deck that I want to share. And then the next 30 minutes you're presenting the decks, only to learn that the customer has 30 minutes and you're done. And they never get back to you. So you hide behind the product, and your approach is something like this. Here are all the things that my product can do for you. Pick the ones that you like. I think that's what leads to failures, although you can close some sales, absolutely. But the problem is that probability, the more features you have, the higher is the probability that you will not, get. And the second thing is, as we don't have a chance to learn about the value. That's why some companies, they introduce so-called discovery call, where all they do is that they ask questions, maybe sometimes tell you something about the product, but most of the time they're just asking questions, then they go back, they prepare a tailored presentation, and then but the basic problem is to hide behind the deck, assume that you know what they need. And I think maybe and we'll talk about when you scale sales, that could be the case. But when you're pre-PMF, you can't learn by showing the product demos without asking questions.
Even in later stages, it's very common
Yeah, I remember you shared one lessons learned, not name the company, but yeah. One lesson that I got from my VP at one of the companies, I was a project manager at the time, not my company, the company I worked for, was that Bayram, you don't sell by email. So the synchronous types of communication are bad for this process of searching for value, for this process of learning. So that's why you can't sell asynchronously. You can gauge an interest, but not sell. But again, we're shy. That's why we want to outsource, we want to hide, and we want to actually send emails or maybe text messages, right, instead of the actual calls. And of course, we want to sell for free because invested so much time, and now no one needs my product. Maybe you'll just take it for the sake of taking it. Sign some kind of letter of intent, okay, or memorandum of understanding, or things like that. No, the problem is that I think one of the strongest indicators of value is price. So it's by our equation, so if price is 0, then the value is a little bit over this 0. So what's the probability of it? Except the cases that I mentioned where by having more users, you increase the value. Someone said the best salesman was the one who sold the very first telephone, because you don't need telephone just for yourself, right? So this kind of, again, we talked about this in the network effect, but the idea is that we can't sell for free. That's because we don't have this signal, the signal of value. And what I noticed with the companies is that if no budget is spent, then no one cares about your product. If it's a B2B sales, then if they didn't pay, they don't care. That's very easy rule. And I think because they have many priorities, would you spend your time on things that does not cost anything or things that cost anything, right? So you just have to allocate your time, and that's why free products tend to have zero attention, especially in B2B, I think.
But here's
Yes.
a question. Yeah.
Yes.
What do you think about premium we discussed?
Yeah, again, with premium, I think it's a case of network effects. So first of all, let's start with the thing that with most of the premium products work like this. The more users you have, the higher, say, the value, the perceived value. And that's why you then start to charge. If the cost is almost 0, if it's a digital product. The other reason to make something is to get, say, an install base, again, to increase the value and then to charge. And the last is the trial. Basically, I give you something to try and then I charge you. And I think all of those, so trial is a form of communication of value
It's about reducing
It's awareness.
yeah.
It's like optimizing acquisition funnel.
Why?
Optimizing acquisition funnel is for example, I don't know, you're selling, let's say, I don't know, applying for the which I don't know.
Yeah.
Hour ago. And it's hard to target through existing tooling ICP users who need premium browser-based
Yep.
digital CAD system.
Yeah.
Yes, potentially you can.
Yeah.
But either like amount of those users will be like really tiny,
Yep.
or like cost of acquisition will be like too high.
Yeah.
I don't know, $2,000 per like
Yeah.
per registered user. Targeting a little bit wider audience, you're like getting more users into acquisition funnel,
Yep.
into this trial mode,
Yes.
and then you convert some of them.
Yep.
So you can say this is about trial, you can say this is about like, optimizing acquisition funnel.
Maybe, but I think trial is a form of communicating value, basically reducing the uncertainty.
Especially for complex products, which
Yes.
have many features.
Exactly. Or entertainment products where you make decision about payment sporadically, instinctively, at the moment, in the moment. Maybe for that kind of products, yes. But last thing, I've noticed this multiple times myself, just 2 days or 3 days ago, on Monday basically, you have a big customer and, I don't know, say the biggest bank or biggest payment system. And since founders by definition are optimistic, because if they were pessimistic, they wouldn't get into the startups, right? Because we're optimistic, we invent in our minds a very complicated path how that big customer, big prospect will eventually be our big customer and deliver us millions of dollars. And I think sometimes that works, but most of the times you are not learning fast. Again, this is a learning process, this is a search process. So with the search process, the scale of search, the amount of experiments matters more than one shot. That's why I think it's very dangerous to get stuck on a big customer, although that could be a very great opportunity.
And
Yes.
it's believed that the hide behind product, there is a semantic effect.
Okay.
Semantic effect. Do you know semantic effect? What is it?
No.
It means then when we hear something,
Okay.
we imagine differently.
Okay.
Or we see something, we explain differently.
Yeah.
That is why it's different, how to say, vision or understanding of value product.
And that's why we hide behind the product demos? Is that the case?
No, it's actually, but you mentioned that this is, it's hide behind because it's shy or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
But it's not miscommunication, it's misunderstanding due to this aspect.
Okay, okay, makes sense. Sounds good. Now let's move on. I think when 80% of the success is to be prepared, and I was wondering what are the signals. Again, remember value and perceived value. If we can somehow find the signals or evidence that the value is already perceived, then it's easier to sell by definition, right? So the question is, what are the signals of the perceived value? What are the signals that some company actually needs our product? Any ideas?
They start asking questions.
Let's say before we actually have any kind of communication, let's say we just researching online. The only tool you have is online. Yes?
Google Trends.
Yes. First of all, they are searching in a form of, say, Google. What else?
Other competitors are on the market and they have sales.
Yes, that's great. That's great. So it's a very good signal. But a signal that a given prospect perceives the value. For the competitors, it's probably not, it's about the market overall, but for a specific, let's say we're preparing for a meeting with a given customer, a prospect, and we want to learn if they actually have this problem and they perceive the value of the problem or the value of a solution.
Sometimes they're hiring, for example, if you are going to sales, they are hiring like
Exactly.
people, or sometimes I do research on LinkedIn looking whom they're hiring,
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
competencies they need.
Exactly, absolutely. So hiring is a great signal if your product helps to reduce costs, and sometimes if your product drives revenue from the current products. What else?
For example, now here in with financial companies, clients mostly financial companies. The biggest problem is a credit risk here. That is why it's pretty easy to look on the credit risk, and it's a high.
Okay.
I mean, it's a great opportunity for us to work
That's great.
here.
So
If they have problems,
yeah.
they have financial problems.
So there are some registries of a problem, or that a given company has a problem or a given need. Your example is great. One of the examples that I can throw in is, so one of our customers, they built a platform to manage drones. So
Sorry, can I what?
drones, yes. And there's a registry of all licenses that were issued to companies that have enough drones for construction purposes, for some other purposes, farming, that because you have to get a permit from specific authorities to actually operate a bunch of.
Even for consumer drones.
No, for industry grade drones, exactly. What a great source of that kind of signals could be that database, and you just take the database and you just parse it. One of the companies that I have, we offer mobile apps for restaurants and white label mobile apps. And what I realized that a great signal of perceived value, the perceived value of mobile delivered orders, is the number of stars or number of reviews on the marketplaces like Grubhub and others. Because the more orders you get from a marketplace, the more reviews you have by definition. But the more orders you get from a marketplace, the more you spend on the marketplace. And my product was basically, our offering was to reduce your spend on marketplaces like Grubhub and others. That's why it's interesting that it seems like every industry has their own set of signals, but there are some general ones. First of all, they already spend money on something. They use something to fix that problem. They hire, exactly. I think that's one of the strongest signals that there's a need, especially now in automation, AI automation and things like that. And laws. I think laws, compliance, the reporting requirements is a great source of, if we know that there's upcoming law about something like, for instance, some kind of compliance reporting, then we actually know that they will have to comply, and that's why they need a product or solution. It could be in the form of engineers.
Great example, yeah, because in one of our countries, our presence here, when National Bank changed regulations, and immediately everybody need to do something.
Exactly. Same with one of our customers. They are targeting airlines, and in one country in Southeast Asia, the Ministry of Tourism changed their regulations in terms of CO2, and the value prop was very straightforward because the company is offering something to address the need. If we recall that, yes, we can find some signals of the value perception, but then one of the tools that we have, the communication, is basically a path to convince the process to make sure that the perceived value is equal to the actual value. So let's talk about that kind of communication. First of all, that's where I think the do things that don't scale applies a lot. This is me on TechCrunch a lot of time ago, but the point is that I think founders have to communicate and use this communication as a way to learn and to search for value. That's why every opportunity that we have, we need to use that opportunity to learn. One way is trade shows and things like that, because the biggest problem is that in today's world, the attention span is very low. And what I realized, it's actually the high is the budget, the low is the attention span, right? By definition, you have a challenge of getting to a person. For instance, on trade shows, what we did is we sponsored a lunch. Because what's great about lunch is that for 40 minutes, people are just sitting in a space. Yes, eating. Yes, some people can't think straight when they're eating. Most of us. But still, their attention level is highest for that kind of level of prospects. And that's why we did that. While in other cases, it could be just wearing the panda costume. I think that support is important for a founder. Basically, responding to every customer support request is very important. Here, I just wanted to show you, this is when we launched App of the Year. A couple of days since launch, so I think we launched on 6th of June. And one of the customers, he logged some support request, and I responded to that request. And then here's his response. He's saying something like, I'm probably one of the top 1% of flyers in the world. We developed a product for frequent flyers. So this is a big help to me. I used a bunch of product. Oh, and by the way, I'm president of the digital group of one of the largest sport and entertainment companies in the world. They own a bunch of clubs, basketball clubs, etc. And basically, this became our power user. And by definition, he's the power user. And he was instrumental in our learning about things that people who travel, I think he logged about 300 flights a year. 300. And I could not have learned more from him, from someone else, because this was our most important customer, and I learned a lot. What I'm trying to say is that responding to support requests is a way to learn about the value, because people, they complain typically about the things that they need. By definition, the amount of complaints is an indicator of value. If we observe that they are more or less. This was an interesting case. You can't read, but TLDR is the person actually sent us a very angry email. Very angry. Then I responded, and then he apologized and said this was the most professional response. He had a bad day, things like that, and we became friends, and I learned a lot from him as well. Again, support, I think, is a great example, because Paul Graham says do things that don't scale, but I need to understand what that actually translates into, and I think that translates into using every chance of communication that you have. So you observe, you think about your company as your company has these, like we as humans, we have sensors of environment, like our eyes, our ears. Similar company has a bunch of sensors, and one of the great sensors is support. Second sensor is sales, and sometimes hiring is a great sensor. But overall, my point is that employ those sensors. And one of the most powerful framework, probably some of you know this, that I to use, because I like frameworks, as you probably realized by now, and equations. I love this. This is by Bob Maesta, the author of Jobs to be Done. And the idea is pretty straightforward. It makes perfect sense. And when you have that kind of concept or framework in your mind, when you ask questions, when you have the conversation, you just ask questions about each of every category of forces. So they call it the 4 forces, and basically the idea is pretty simple. People will switch to your product if their current situation is unsatisfactory, so something is pushing them out of the current thing. There are some aspects of your product that actually pull, so this is the second force, and there are 2 forces that actually prevent that. Those costs that we talked about, switching costs and things like that. So the anxieties and inertia. Inertia is, remember the behavior change costs, switching costs. Anxieties is the uncertainty that we had before. And the idea is the equation is pretty simple. You have to, the forces at the top should be the forces at the bottom, and makes perfect sense. The real question is how to measure these forces, and that's where I think sales meetings are instrumental. First of all, the idea is we don't know what they value, so we have a bunch of hypotheses, right? For instance, one of you here, we had a conversation, sales conversation, and I asked if you're engaged in responses to RFP and responses to RFI, because I wanted to learn whether one of the things that I want to automate makes sense, and that question helped me test the hypothesis. The idea is basically ask a bunch of questions, pay attention to emotional and energy spikes when people answer those questions. And what I like a lot is to look for compensating behavior. Basically, when we use some kind of product, not the way it has to be used. Typically, for instance, we use employees to do the things that does not make sense economically. So the costs are higher than the value. And I will not explain every, because Bob Meister does it great way. But what I learned about, in my experience and others, is that we tend to neglect the importance of the context that the person is or a company is, and we tend to ignore some vague statements that they have. For instance, let me give you a vague statement. For instance, you communicate the price, and I say, it's expensive. Expensive is a vague statement. What is the great statement, or what is a great follow-up question to actually understand that vague statement? Any ideas? So I say something is expensive. What is the best question to, and it's vague. Expensive is not relative. It's, compare. Yeah. Expensive in comparison to what? And then you start to understand their perception, their decision-making process. Because when they say it's more expensive than the current product we use, great, now we have the foundation, what to compare against. And then I can say, okay, so what does that product do? What are the things that they do? And then we unpack that, we collect the facts, and then we use that to then present our product. So what I'm trying to say is that these questions help us to unpack, and we should spend most of our time trying to understand the perception. So what I have here is start, why, and end now. And typically, the end result of this communication should be the ICP. I'm sure you learned about this a lot. I just want to pay your attention a couple of things. First of all, I think we always talk about demographics, like industry, size, location, decision maker, things like that. But what we sometimes forget, this is the hiring that we discussed, this is the behavioral attributes is something that we forget. And that's what we should be thinking about. How frequently a given problem appears. For instance, with the responses to RFP, how many responses do you issue every month or so? Or how much time do you spend on that, and things like that. But the idea is that ICP is the end result of this. Just from the perspective of time, let me just move on to the scaling sales then, because I'm afraid we won't have enough time, but I think this is very important. The question is, okay, we know the ICP, we know we have those customer sales meetings, we ask questions, we understand the value, we know how to communicate, how to push it from the perceived value to the actual value. Okay, but when do I hire the first sales rep? That's the question you may have. And I think before we answer this question, let's just review this great excerpt from this great show.
Who are these people? I don't know. Did Jack hire engineers already? These people are not engineering people.
That's right, fellas. These are new salespeople. They're the best in the business.
The Hooley lawsuit did temper our ability to get funding. It did not slow down the engineering.
Yes, question.
Yeah, Keith, Northeast Regional. You don't foresee any technical debt issues slowing our ability to scale? Actually, no, none whatsoever. We've identified all our underlying issues, and we have a plan in place for rapid growth. Yes?
Doug, global accounts and systems integration. What kind of growth are you projecting here?
This may sound a little bit grandiose, but it's not unrealistic to think that we have the potential for worldwide penetration on the scale of, say, Google or Facebook.
This is really great, Richard. Just keep going.
Sure. Yeah. In regards to the launch, we are hoping to go wide, get it into the hands of as many people as possible.
Jan, Director of Inside Sales. They call me Jan the Man. Oh, when you say people, you mean companies, right?
Yeah, we're business-based.
Okay, just want to clarify.
Actually, no, sorry, Jan. Okay. Well, by people, I do mean people, humans, consumers.
Keith,
Northeast Regional again.
Jack told us we would be selling directly to businesses.
He did.
Doug, I'm shadowing Keith. Yes, he did.
Definitely. I was there.
So,
Okay, let me get this straight.
I think that before we discuss scaling, I think we need to understand that only by doing the founder sales yourself, you will get to a point where you understand how product and sales interact with each other, and then you have to hire those sales reps. And what would be a great indicator? First of all, you have, for a B2B, you have high conversion rates, like 50% plus. My experience is that's where you can actually say that you're probably at the product market fit. Second is the
Can you say what conversion?
from a lead to close deal.
By lead, you mean like
Customer that is in compliance with the ICP that you learned about before. It's what they call a qualified lead. Basically, that company is, according to your experience, closing the deals, and they fit the profile, and that's why you're confident that this is the right company, and the conversion rates are high, over 50%. Okay, make sense? In fact,
it
yeah.
should be also, it should depend on competition a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Again, I think the concept of competition, I think you raised it again, as well, is a concept that out of scope right now, but I'm happy to talk about it more later. But the point is that if we get to a point where we observe these indicators, these metrics, that's direct green light to scale. That's my key point here. That when we have strong conversion rates, that means that now we're at PMF and we need to increase our efforts in selling. Same with the time it takes to close. I think many people have this concept of a market pool. I really think it fits the previous two metrics, but the idea is that you get this feeling of a market pool. And I like this concept, this indicator more. In the theory of constraints, there's this concept that you have a lot of product before the process that is the constraint of your company. So basically, if we don't have time to sell, if our calendars are packed with meetings, that's a great indicator.
Can you say the other thing?
Yes.
You start to hire people when you understand that the process that you created can be repeatedly delegated to somebody else. And before that, when you don't have conversion of 50%, that means it's not a process to discovery. But once you go out to 50%, it's a process. Now that you can scale, you can delegate it, and no longer have to do it by yourself.
Exactly. That's the purpose of scaling, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now. So if these happen, we need to scale. We need to have a repeatable process. That's my point. So scaling is actually a repeatable process. And the process of what? Process of converting the leads, the qualified leads, to the customers, right? So if we think about this makes perfect sense. If we have, every process has basically 3 components. What are those? Input, right?
output?
Output, exactly. And
Some magic inside.
and some magic inside, which we will talk about. But the idea is that these are the 3 elements, and for every process, remember the high output management, right, in the growth, second chapter, every process should have a bunch of metrics, and those metrics are the ones that we need to measure, to introduce and implement a repeatable process. What are those metrics? The rate of input, right? How many leads are generated each week, say? The conversion rate, and who knows the third one?
Conversion.
Churn rate.
Time also.
Time, exactly, yeah.
So it's okay.
Yeah, so basically this describes the whole. And by the way, if for instance I know how many leads are here and what's the rate of this, I can actually deduce the time. Or if I know what is the output and input, by definition it's conversion. If I know output and conversion, I know the rate and things like that. But the idea is that the scaling is a repeatable process. We need these 3 metrics, and we need to manage these metrics, monitor it, and make changes. That's the basic idea. Let's test if, again, just these three metrics, okay? Remember those. Let's try to make a couple of decisions. Okay. Don't pay attention to the last word. But okay, anyway. Let's say we have 2 sales reps. And we don't know out of 100. This line is not visible. I just forgot it. Forgot to hide it. But we know that on average, this sales rep closes 10 customers, this sales rep closes 20. Can we make a decision whom to promote if we don't know this?
Is the profit, okay. But is the product at the same price for both?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't know how many leads each of them have. We know how long.
That's the second question I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
But we don't know how many leads. Yeah.
That's basically the it's out of 100. Yeah, if we hide this, then we can say nothing because we don't have the conversion. We have the rate of output because 20 customers per month is this. It's the rate of output.
Is the leads randomized?
It's time for.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. What's that? What's that?
Value.
I believe right will be because it's quicker speed of time. Time
Yeah.
will be 5. The here will be time.
Well, again, if we don't know this, probably you can't make a decision because this could have 200 or. Okay, 200 will be equal 1,000, then you have a problem, right? But my point is that the rate, only one of the metrics is not enough to make the decisions like this. To basically, what is a decision to promote? What is or to fire? It's a decision to optimize the process, right? We observe the process. We can think of this not as people, as an equipment. We have 2 types of equipment. One equipment transforms energy with one KPI, conversion rate, and the other. So it could be equipment, it could be people, it doesn't really matter. The point is that when we are working on a repeatable process, we don't care about individuals, we care about the high picture and the numbers. Let me make it even harder. What if this one delivers, this is average, right? The problem with the average is that it's average. So sometimes this one delivers 5 customers per month, sometimes 15, sometimes this customer delivers 0 customers, and sometimes 40. Which one would you promote and why?
Like the first one, because she delivers predictable results.
Yes.
This delivers 5.
Exactly. In terms of the goal of repeatable process, the first one is much more interesting because we can have a better prediction, better forecasting. We can do a better. And imagine if there's an onboarding team. So the team that actually starts working with the customer after they close them. If we have all of our sales reps are like this, then sometimes our onboarding team will be just doing nothing.
No, just
Yeah.
We promote the first one, but keep researching about what they're doing in the second one.
Exactly. That's what I want. Basically,
You're keeping moving.
yeah, exactly. It's called exactly. It seems like there is some. I call these tanks, these Ferraris. So Ferrari rides in a town like this. Every crossing, they stop. Every traffic lights, they stop. But they travel very fast, right?
There is a corporate bullshit bingo definition for this one.
Okay.
It's insecure overachiever.
Okay, it's here. Okay, yes.
Like the deal size matters on each.
Let's assume that it's the same. Yes, same product, same price.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right that we should take that into account. What I want to say here is that there's the systems principle that the information merges when we compare. So if we have low sales, then let's just start comparing, right? Let's just compare one sales rep to another. Let's compare one industry to another and things like that. There's this, again, concept of different levels of managers. Most of the managers, we use average values, mean values, to make decisions. There's 10 customers on average. Sometimes pay attention to variability, right? Plus minus 20. And sometimes they actually understand why. Something, like you said, something interesting is going on there, right? Somehow he or she closes 40 customers a month, and we need to understand why. And only now I want to say one word about CRM. I think if CRM captures all of that, all of those metrics, that's enough. If you can manage to capture all of that in an Excel file, I think you're okay. Because my observation proves that the company can't make something work in a simple system, they will never make it work in a complex system.
It's a
What's that?
good law or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Every working complex system will born from working simple system. Every complex system is trying to be built.
Exactly.
Operation won't work. Yeah.
Yes, so a word about CRM. Starting simple, Excel file, for instance, that essentially I think there are three functions or stages of adoption of CRM. The first, we just want to control sales reps. We want to calculate those metrics by the sales rep. That's number one. Then we want to forecast. We know that they predictable, unpredictable, blah, blah, blah. That's why we can plan the revenue. And only then, I think it's about optimization, actually asking questions, finding answers to the questions of why. Like why that person delivers 40 customers a month and then 0. What happens? Is one of the, so I'm advising some startups, and one of the CEO asked me this. So Bayram, help me to understand this. I have a great sales rep, he's the best in terms of sales, but he keeps coming late to every meeting. And my immediate question was, is it for internal meetings or external meetings? Like meetings with customers, because if it's to external meetings, then that's an interesting information. And he says, no, only internal. And I'm like, okay, why do you care then? Okay, you want him, so he doesn't pay attention. He doesn't value, the perceived value of your meetings is lower to his value of his time and alternative value. But the idea is that we can optimize if we collect that information. For instance, right now, one of the projects that we extract information from the sales calls, we put it into CRM to answer questions like why a given sales rep closes better than the other if the leads are randomized and things like that. And I think this is only the third stage. You can't do that on the first stage, and you shouldn't. You should start with the simple things. So if you can do all of that in the CRM, you can measure those prospects. No need to try to buy Salesforce. Please no Salesforce until it works for you. And yes, to your point, Daniel, so complex system that works also from simple system that works. Summarize. Yes.
Sometimes it just works as a storage system. You can extract data from Salesforce and use Excel to run your sales process.
Exactly, yeah. I remember a big company in the oil industry. They bought SAP, and it was a 2-year-long project to basically implement SAP in that company. But what was happening actually is that they just exported data from SAP to Excel file, did all the stuff in the Excel file, and then imported it back to SAP. Tens of millions of
Previous slide.
Yes.
So I have a friend who does Excel import tool for the Salesforce only. Plus he makes $3 million a year just from experience.
Exactly.
Managing sales team the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's huge business in Salesforce, like exporting, importing.
Yeah, absolutely. To summarize, again, we just had 2 hours. I know I skipped some of the content, but I just want to just 3 or 4 messages, take-home messages. Those would be, it's a search for the founders level, founder-led sales. It's a search process. We should approach it as a search. We should make hypotheses. We should have enough experiments and data to make decisions. We shouldn't scale the indicators that I mentioned. Start simple and measure the key variables. Just believe me, all of the other variables could be probably will be the consequences. All of the dashboards, as you can see in every CRM, they are consequences of these three simple variables. It's just a level of details, like for instance, cold leads, warm leads, blah, 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 negotiation, things like that. So just focus on what's really important. That's basically it. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. Can we make it more practical? Can you say like how you came to your current sales process at new onsa.ai?
Yeah.
And did you start sales before having product, or you came?
Sure.
So it's very interesting how you came with idea, how you came then with sales. Yeah.
Sounds good. With onsa, it was like this. We started with a different product in mind. It was called Mindshare, maybe some of, and the hypothesis was that we experts, consultants, knowledge workers, they will want the digital twins, some like digital copies that would be trained on their content, and they will act on behalf of those influencers, knowledge workers, etc. But what we realized fairly quickly that the business model of knowledge worker or consultant is actually in a direct conflict with this idea, because they charge per hour. We, by implementing a digital twin, we're basically dropping the cost, the perceived value of their time. That's why we couldn't get it off the ground. But what I started hearing from many people is that, Bayram, I need a digital twin of my specific employees, like sales, finance, marketing, etc. I'm like, okay, there was a hackathon in London, and I was like, okay, let me just hack a digital twin of a sales rep and see if someone actually wants to buy this. And I won some kind of prize on that hack, and then I just published it in my social media and approached a couple of people personally from my personal network, and who I noticed that are hiring sales reps or hiring for cold outreach. And I just offered them our product with the one caveat: they had to pay in advance for a first year of the product use. And I think I approached about 10 people. Out of 10, about 7 or 8 said this is interesting. About 5 said yes, we're paying. And then I approached a bigger company that develops software for the sales industry, and I offered them this as a product to their suite of products that they offer. And they had zero experience with AI, LLMs, and etc. So we struck a deal where I got a pretty huge amount of money paid up front as like advance for royalty payments for this product when it will be part of the product suite that they have. And that was the arrangement that we did. And these indicators, this partnership, proved that there's a need and a perceived value in the digitizing and automating what sales reps are doing. That's how I did this. And then I just started building on this. For instance, I quickly realized that I had some assumptions about what's important for a salesperson. And I quickly realized that some aspects of this process could be automated much better than the others. And those are actually, let me give you an example of Excel to Salesforce. So one of the problems that I think every sales rep has is that they hate entering data into the CRM. It doesn't matter which one. Fixing that problem actually makes total sense, and there are some products that are providing that kind of solutions. So what I'm trying to say is that by having this early indicators of interest and then having those conversation in sales and not selling for free the things that I talked about, and making sure that the perceived value is equal to the value, or at least is moving towards that, I was able to make a decision that we need to switch from the mindshare to onsa and focus on this digital twins of the sales reps. That's the transition that we made in March, April this year. And so far, it's proved successful, and I think I made the decision that the next 5-7 years, probably that's what we're going to do. And I had the same assumption about the previous product, but the key difference is that market pool and the conversion rate and the time to close the deal. That's what I see right now. The only problem I have right now is how to make the sales, what's called like how to build the sales engine. Basically a self-serve product that makes the sales happen, because right now it takes a pretty big amount of my time. It's a learning process, but if I can't make this transition from the learning process to the product that actually self-delivers the value, then we have a big problem.
You don't make cleanup yourself?
I think we're not there, technologically we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But it makes much more sense to just focus on those aspects that could be automated at the moment, but maybe at some point, yeah. Why not? That's the problem. I think the conversion in time is the right metric. The conversion over 50% and the time to close the deal that shrinks, these are the indicators of a market pool. Some people say that it's when word of mouth starts, but I know...
Conversion doesn't go up and time should...
Exactly, yes. Yeah, because those are interdependent variables, right? But some people say that this is a word of mouth, for instance, or they say it's organic growth. But I tend to prefer like the concepts that can be measured. Like I can measure conversion rate, I can measure the time to close. By the way, if conversion rate, right now, for instance, for us, the conversion rate is about 70 to 80%. Guess what I'm doing? Because a product is not... What's that? Yes, I'm building a self-serve product, but that takes time, so what...
Sorry, but let's understand, your product's still not ready till it's not a final product, yeah? You're still or you have a...
Yeah, we already offer a product and it's used in production. It's just not the self-serve version that you can see on our website. So there's like a... But when the conversion is too high, the straightforward answer is to increase. You don't have any other lever to...
Or maybe you have a very small funnel, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. So
maybe you extremely decrease it here, including this reason.
Or product might be ready for consultative sales approach.
Yep,
where
exactly.
they're like working with customers directly, like medium or like bigger businesses.
Yes.
But not polished enough to put it in the sales engine Bayram is talking about.
Exactly, yes, that's my problem right now.
Moving human beings because it's too pricey to drive, I don't know, $100 a month sales.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's my key challenge. I know what needs to be built because during those sales, since I can hack, I hack some small parts of the product, and that helps me to sell. But you realize that this is actually like a mechanical Turk, so some aspects of the product are fulfilled by me until we automate that, until we turn that into a product.
Can you tell more what be specific?
Sure, yeah. For instance, let's say every customer, for instance, let's say we want to automate the lead generation, right? Outreach the prospective customers and through, say, LinkedIn and generate the new prospective customers. The biggest problem with this is I need to understand the ICP, the ideal customer profile. I need to have a conversation with the customer to have that ICP defined, because the way customers define the ICP is way different from company to company. Some people have this conversation, they even ask me, why are you asking about the title? And I'm like, title of a person is number one thing that I want to know if they receive the value, they have authority for budget. And they were like, cool, wow, that's interesting. For instance, this was in a real estate business, for instance. This process of defining ICP now takes about 2 meetings. Yes, it's done only once, but it takes 2 meetings. And typically that means 1 or 2 calendar weeks.
So it happens after the sales or before closing?
It happens, sometimes it happens before, sometimes it's part, basically it's a part of the sales process, yes. But what we're building right now is basically we automatically scan and parse the website of our customer, we'll learn everything there is, because websites have case studies, customer stories, things like that. We'll learn that. We define the ICP and we show it to you, and then you just make the changes. You can say that, hey, our focus right now is healthcare only. Focus only on healthcare. And by the way, here's an attachment, a file in the attachment, because many times companies have some kind of sales playbook and they want to attach it, and then we parse it and we fine-tune the ICP. But there's the second step in that ICP definition is we provide 10 prospects and the customer has to rate them. They say, this is score 5, means that very relevant prospective customer. Or this one is too big for us, like revenue size. Of course, I would love to have that kind of customer, but no. So
Are you talking about basically what's called firing the customer?
How you're optimizing ICP for the customer of your new business.
Exactly,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, I got it.
And so then they're in a Tinder-like way, but not like swiping, but basically they say, these prospects are great, these are not. And here's why. And then we learn and we then output a different set of prospects. And when we get to a point where 80% of the prospects were at least score 4 on the 5 score scale, then it says, yes, now this is the ICP. Now we want to have 300 or 1,000, depending on your focus industry customers. Then this whole thing is done semi-manually right now. I have a bunch of Python scripts that do some of those things, but then I have to be the face, I have to present and things like that. And our goal right now is to, and we're building this, is just not ready yet.
So you're defining ICP and you are going to like Apollo.
Exactly, Apollo, LinkedIn, and Zoom info, yes, exactly.
Through the API, you're getting the
Exactly.
contacts.
Yep.
You like putting all that, feeding a CRM system, and you what you are doing next, like calling or emailing.
Right now we're doing a LinkedIn only. But then it will be, I can call in.
So LinkedIn means like LinkedIn prospecting, right? Sending message.
Yeah, so connection request, then message, then follow up and things like that.
And what is your, if you don't mind to share, what is your engagement rate
Sure.
on code?
About 1.52% from sending a connection request to having a meeting.
Wow, it's very
People,
good.
1.52%
Nice.
from sending connection request to actually showing up on
Are you choosing industries which converse?
Covering it.
Sorry, yeah. Okay.
I will hear my
Yeah, but there is like, are you choosing industries which converse on such a very good rate, or you hacking the message?
So right now, obviously, we're focusing on some industries, but not the other, and that's part of the learning process. For instance, probably because I understand some industries better, we do better in some aspects of it, but not the other. But I realized it depends on the customer stage. For instance, if the customer is on the stage of startup, it's much harder. Or, for instance, customer is in the industry that is not, it's very hard to sell through LinkedIn or by other asynchronous means of selling. But overall, the idea is to basically, through this learning process, to understand what are the key industries and then remember the scale effects, to employ the scale effects. Because when I do the API call, say to fetch all the CEOs of airlines, let's say. If my second customer is also targets the CEOs of the airline industry, I can reuse the
Data.
cache, the data. Variable costs to fixed costs, like we discussed. So that's why what I'm realizing that we will have to focus on the industries, and obviously the industries that show the best time to close the deal and the conversion rates, those process measures.
And finally, great.
Hold on.
Sorry, you mentioned about RFPs.
Yeah.
Is it still in process? Or?
We didn't develop anything yet. Maybe hackathon this weekend, I will hack the first version of that.
Okay.
But
So
this is-
where does the workflow start for RFPs? Or have you thought about it?
Yeah, I thought about it. My assumption
Yeah.
is this. I used to prepare responses to RFPs for a software outsourcing company. And typically it's 3 people, marketing, sales, and development, R&D, for 2 weeks. That's the time it takes to prepare a response to RFP. But 70% of information actually comes from the previous RFPs. So what I think AI could help us with is to basically get that 70% of the previous RFPs for the RAG-like techniques and prepare the first draft version of response to RFP and then have the human oversight to finalize it. So to cut the times to prepare the response to RFP. And what's interesting is that I realized I was talking to one of the prospective customers about this idea as well, because again, discovery call, I'm just asking questions. And they said this, we're participating in every RFP, but we rarely win, but we have to, because that's like a sign of presence on the market. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. So people are doing stuff just to demonstrate, signal their presence in the industry. So maybe these kind of customers will be much better than the customers that actually care about the response to RFP. But then I realized that the company that is organizing this RFP process actually has a huge problem of aggregating information from different documents prepared in different formats and editions with different types, font types, and etc. to aggregate this into a table that you can compare. That's my second hypothesis, but again, we haven't built the product yet.
So you don't work tangentially with CPQs. You this is mostly for service-based industry, like into project-based.
Yeah, no. We don't, yes. Not yet. Again, I'm just exploring this.
No.
That's fine. Thank you guys.